Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com. Hey everyone, this is your co-host JT, and I'm here with my other co-host.
Hey everyone, it's Kirby.
And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about the Prime by Cortex podcast and what our plans are going forward. We've got a lot of content in the docket already, and we've got a lot of content in the works. So why don't we start with Kirby? Why don't you introduce yourself?
I've been involved with Cortex as a player, game moderator for nearly a year now. I switched my podcast from Genesis to the Cortex role-playing system, but I have been involved in tabletop gaming for, I guess, 16 years now, more or less, at the time of this recording, doing a variety of different games, and I've essentially found Cortex when I was looking to do a sort of sci-fi western, so naturally I found it through the Firefly role-playing system, which never actually ran a game in the Firefly setting, but Firefly RPG, which was Cortex Plus, if you weren't already aware, was my first break-in with Cortex, and honestly, I basically fell in love with the system from there. But how about yourself, JT? How did you get into all of this shenanigans for our listeners at home?
Yeah, well, actually, like you, I got into Cortex originally through the Firefly RPG. I was a member of a Facebook group that did one-shots, and I ended up playing in a one-shot for someone who was running Firefly, and I just thought it was like the coolest system because it was so rules light and flexible and very narrative, which is something I like. So I picked up the book and did some of my own things with the Firefly, and then I started looking into other Cortex games, and that, as you would say, was that, and I was hooked on Cortex. And then, of course, when the Kickstarter for Cortex Prime popped up, I had been thinking for a few years, like, oh, wouldn't it be great if they came out with some sort of new Cortex that was like the generic thing? Because we had Cortex plus Hacker's Guide, which kind of talked about ways to use the different Cortex rules to do your own thing, but it wasn't really like a generic rule set like you have with Cortex Prime. So I backed that and was super happy when I finally got my PDF and then my hard copy. And I'm really excited to do this show with you, Kirby.
What this show is going to be about is we are covering interviews with Cortex creators who are working on projects for the upcoming Creator Studio at the time of this recording that has yet to release. So that's going to incorporate creators both big and small. We don't want to just interview only people who are working directly with Cortex, although we do have some interviews lined up for just that. And we also want to take a look at various Prime by Cortex games in general, which involves discussing roles, mechanics, and maybe a little bit of actual play.
And also in the future, if any listeners have questions, you can submit them to us. Our email is pbcpodcast@d20radio.com. Why don't we talk a little bit, Kirby, about why we were doing this podcast in the first place?
Right. So JT and I wanted to do this podcast in order to highlight basically all the wonderful stuff that's going to be coming down the pipeline when the Creative Studio goes live. It's not always easy to get things talked about or highlighted, even with such a centralized platform. That's at the very least why I wanted to do it. And also, frankly, I wanted an excuse to be able to talk to some of these folks who are masterminding these games.
Kirby was nice enough to be my co-host on this project. When I brought it up with him, I knew he had been talking about it earlier in the Cortex Prime server. We also, I think, Kirby did want to sort of use this as a platform to spread the word about Cortex, if you will, because it's been off the shelves for a while. For the most part, they had stopped making, new prints of the games, and a lot of people might not even have had any experience with previous versions of Cortex. So we wanted to let them know a little bit about Prime and what they can expect.
So I think a lot of people do recognize names from Cortex history, such as Marvel Heroics, Leverage, Smallville, and other such games. And but it's never been under such a branded, branded is probably the right word, branded umbrella that Fandom and Cam Banks and the rest of the team put together.
Yeah, we are just hoping that as time goes on, we'll be able to give you sort of news and announcements of new Cortex stuff that's launching and talk about all the different hot topics, whether it's a question about how a certain mechanic works or how to create a particular game or setting in Cortex, like how we do it. I think that that's going to be a really cool experiment, and I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, we talked about wanting to do listener questions. We also want to do other segments such as mashing up different IPs or going over how JT and I might cover an IP ourselves if we were cortexifying it, as it were, priming it, however you want to say it. And JT, where can folks actually send those suggestions or questions that they might have?
Right, so we got a few ways to reach us. We have a Primed by Cortex Facebook page, which you can find on Facebook. Then we also have a Twitter account, which is at Primed by Cortex. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, for listener questions or if you just want to email us, you can get us at pbcpodcast at d20radio.com. Yeah, I think that between those three, someone is going to be able to respond to any messages and make sure that your voice is heard.
And also, if you're doing something for the Creator Studio, you can also reach us there, and we can talk about maybe setting up an interview. So our main bag is going to be interviews and system discussions. We are hoping to get interviews out as regularly as possible, but you can at least look out for the latest system discussion episodes bi-weekly.
And I forgot to mention that we're both actually on the Cortex Discord server, so you can always catch us there. We're usually discussing different Cortex-related topics and talking about games and mechanics and other stuff. So feel free to go ahead and join that if you want.
Yeah, to be clear, we do not run the Discord. However, it's a very active community that has both the staff from Fandom, to include Cam Banks himself, and other contributors to Cortex, as well as just a growing community in general of players and game moderators who want to run the game.
Right, right. But actually, Kirby, we actually do have our own channel that should be up by the time of this recording in the D20 Radio Discord server. So if you want to talk specifically about the podcast there, you can look for the D20 Radio server. You can look at D20 Radio on Facebook, and they also have a Twitter, and you should be able to find your way to the Facebook group from there.
And we're looking forward to generating more content for you all to consume. This is just more a who we are, what we're doing, and less about system discussions. You can look for our first official episode here soon. But in the meanwhile, please come check out any of the sites or emails or servers that we've mentioned. You can find all those in the show notes, and we will see you next time.